I've always been a keen enthusiast when it comes to technology, and also very quickly I started to realize that technology was like the great equalizer, and it was becoming easier and easier for me to kind of like have less and less access to stuff, or less and less time. It's more of like an adaptive or kind of reaction based music engine that lives inside of the head unit of the vehicles. It's just another mode in the Mercedes vehicles called Sound Drive. Just for fun, I made this trailer over lunchtime a couple of days ago. I was watching Shogun the night before and I got inspired, and I was like, oh cool, I want to make like a Japanese themed drama series trailer, and never made a trailer in my life before. We had the opportunity to essentially help the refugee team, which has been around for I think 4 or 5 Olympics now, have a sense of identity where otherwise they didn't. They never really had an anthem, there was never a campaign. The need for a technology background is not even there actually. But the only boundary to entry is really exercising your imagination. And I've just been a real proponent of trying to use that stuff, and of course there's always the bad with the good, and a lot of people are there commentating on all of that stuff. That's cool. I just like to make stuff. So I'm just out here trying to use the tools whilst they're available and try and fast track, best idea wins. That's really the most exciting prediction I can make.
Mannon, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks so much, Justin.
Great to have you here. And let's just start right away with really knowing about your journey, because I'm really curious about what's really going on lately. And you have been blowing in social media. And if we can start, maybe I'll ask you about how unique your journey is. And you have used AI, blending AI with music innovations. And what's the first spark that you had an interest in AI as a creative tool?
Man, so first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, man. We've been trying to do this for a while, so glad to be on Flomax with you. And I guess my journey it's really been around over a decade of, just playing with technology. I've always been a keen enthusiast when it comes to technology, and also, the creative industries. I've been making music since I was like 15, 16 in my bedroom, and always had like a desire to try and make cool stuff, whether it's, photography or music or even film at times. And, you know, whilst I was also studying and working, as an engineer, a product person, whatever, I always tried to have something on the side which kind of kept me going creatively. And the truth is that I think with time constraints and the fact that I was working full-time jobs and, still wanting to scratch the itch, very quickly I started to realize that technology was like the great equalizer, and it was becoming easier and easier for me to kind of like have less and less access to stuff, or less and less time, and still feel like I'm able to create. Started off in music, obviously, and then that really extended over the course of the last sort of 8-9 years, when there was this kind of machine learning boom, and a lot of the work I was doing in ad tech was leveraging this kind of technology that then kind of slowly transcended into like kind of recommendation engines based on machine learning, with things that I was leveraging in the music tech world that I was working in at the time to help, make smart decisions around how to, find chord progressions or drum patterns or whatever for some of those products I was building. And then, of course, like more recently, that really kind of transcended into what we've been calling Gen AI. And I think once that started happening, that arc of, the evolution of that technology has now kind of led us to, well, I'm sure you're going to end up using some kind of AI tool to edit this podcast, where we can, go from idea or imagination to manifestation of that idea so quickly. And so I've just been really doubling down on that. I've been an optimist around, those tools and the impact on people who actually want to create stuff like myself. And I've just been a real proponent of trying to use that stuff, and of course there's always the bad with the good, and a lot of people are there commentating on all of that stuff. That's cool, but I just like to make stuff. So I'm just I'm just out here trying to use the tools whilst they're available and try and fast track my creative process and hopefully inspire a few others to do the same.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love your journey. I mean, a lot of people who are adopting AI right now, and just to share with you, it's a lot of confusion is going on. And with you on this podcast, you could impact a lot of my audiences and also your audiences as well. That we can find an innovative way, a creative way of how we can find that spark within us. So let's go with education, right? Education. I know that you have also a little bit of background. Like education is being reshaped by AI right now, and in your background, like how do you see AI transforming learning, skill building, and unlocking new opportunities?
Yeah, education's, an interesting one. I had the privilege of working in a couple of ed tech companies now. I started out in a company called Cano, where we were teaching kids to code using kind of like Raspberry Pi units that we would, build these beautifully illustrated books around to help people understand or kids understand the nature of the components and storytell through their journey of like writing their first line of code through to EF Education First, where I had the VP innovation role, and this was 2018, and it was really great because they were super open to the idea of leveraging emerging technology for teaching kids actually in China and other parts of the world how to speak English for as young as age 3. And in 2018, the Holt family, Philip Holt, who runs EF, was, along with a guy named Lee Shinneman, who runs the product and technology divisions there. They just kind of gave me carte blanche, and we created this smart speaker for kids to almost treat like a pet. It was kind of inspired by Tamagotchi, and it was really cool. We won a bunch of awards for it. We had some really proprietary technology for voice on there, and this was like still around like the Alexa boom. You know what I mean? So to see that ed tech companies were already embracing, emerging technologies like voice AI, if you want to call it that, right? It wasn't exactly as the fidelity wasn't the same as what we have today a few years later, but it was still, still something that they were embracing and trying to lead from the front with. And I think that in general, education has been one of those industries where there are those people who are leading from the front, but really there's a long tail of just legacy and construct that is really hard to kind of decode and get in between. And I think that what the current crop of technologies is doing is really kind of fast tracking that across the board for the whole industry. And my wife, who works in as a speech language therapist, was working in a couple of schools over the last couple of years, and just hearing the conversations that are going on inside educational institutions, obviously private companies like EF, where I've had some time, and even companies like Mindvalley, where I've been spending the last couple of years helping to kind of create and shape some skill-based education, but a lot of it is not really so much the skills, because the skills can be picked up so quickly or have been replaced by tools. So now you don't even necessarily need to, in many cases, have the 10,000 or 20,000 hours of beating on your craft to have a skill set that you can be utilized. Now it's a lot of it is, hey, look, there's 5 or 6 tools that can fast track that idea for you. It might not be to the level of the top tier crafts person in that industry that you're interested in pursuing, but it will get you 70, 80, 90% of the way there in many cases. And so I think education is another area where that's really happening rapidly. It's like, what are we actually educating people on? Are we educating them on that actual skill set that we used to educate them on, but it used to just take 3 years and now it might take 3 months? Or are we educating them on how to use the tools that will mean that anybody, even without that skill set, can participate and accelerate and push ideas forward in that industry and in that vertical, whatever that may be? And so I think you're seeing this now in a few industries. Engineering, to be honest, is going to be one that most rapidly changes. I'm sure it's the same as you, but my entire generation was focused on having at least technology or IT chops, if not computing and software engineering and so on. And I read a crazy stat the other day, but I think it's, at some point in the near future, they're estimating 80 or 90% of all code will be written by AI, which completely transforms the need for 3, 4 year degrees in software engineering. How long before we have to start thinking about what those people are going to be studying? So I think that's the potential impact of what's happening right now. Is I think there's going to be rapid transformation in education. I think across the board, all subjects are going to need to adopt AI in different ways and reimagine what curriculum looks like, which I think is a good thing. I feel like everybody in general has been trending towards, there's a larger dropout rate, there's a lower application rate for a lot of institutions. There has been over the last few years. And I think that's going to start shifting because I think, these institutions will need to start adding value by leveraging these technologies and preparing people for the real world.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That's very insightful. Like we are at the age that we wanted to learn a specific skill, even though we have finished the traditional education, or maybe we didn't. But we are at the age that we wanted to have that unfair advantage. And as you said, like the speed of learning, the speed of teaching, the speed of, instead of going for mastery of, as you mentioned, like maybe 10,000 hours,
Yeah.
it could probably reduced in just a few hours just because
Yeah.
of AI. And maybe we could imagine like how kids will be in the future. Like how are they going to learn with AI, right?
Yeah. My son, who's 5, is already so inquisitive and so engaged with conversational AI. Like he'll just talk to it for 40 minutes if it's there and ask it questions and ask follow-up questions and give opinions. And these are we were sort of computer or screen natives, right? As we were growing up, we started to become technology natives, let's say more broadly. They are AI natives. So what does that mean? I mean, it's difficult to forecast, what that might look like, but what it does mean for sure is the value put on skills, like as we know them, I mean, is going to be very different. Like you can see it already in so many industries, not necessarily from AI, but just from the impact of technology. In music, for example, when before Spotify, obviously was like iTunes and Napster and LimeWire and all those things before that, right? But those platforms made it super easy to get songs or albums where albums cost $15 or whatever, right? 12, $15. So now you're buying you'd be able to download a $15 thing on the internet connection back then in, let's say, an hour, right? You download it in 1 hour or an hour and a half or whatever. Sort of Napster, where $15 albums were free and illegal, obviously, to iTunes where it was legitimized, but it's now $9.99. Then we went from iTunes to Spotify, where the whole history of music is $9.99 a month, right? So now you can have any song you want, like, and all the new ones for just a single payment of $9.99. So then music becomes commoditized, and the value put on music, as you can see in the industry, has been suffering for many years, and it's always in the news. The value of the artist, the value of the music for the general population, I mean, is just drastically different to what it was when we were growing up, right? And we were going to the record shop and buying CDs or albums or whatever. And so that I think then has happened with film. We've seen it obviously with Netflix and similar and other industries. It's happened with photography because now everyone's a photographer and has an Instagram feed. And of course, there are people who spend inordinate amounts of money on cameras like me, but nonetheless, it's like, well, your picture and my picture, a couple of taps away from having a great filter on Instagram for the general untrained eye, let's say. But that's all about value. And I think, going back to your question about education, I think the value put on degrees and formal qualifications has already been dwindling over many years for different reasons. And what this does now is, I think, eliminate the argument altogether. It's like I can learn how to use tools that will already help me get there. Do I have knowledge in those areas? Not necessarily, but creating results because I have the right ideas is possible. It might not be the best thing or the right thing to do, but it's possible. So I think that's where people who are working at the forefront of innovating within education are going to change a lot, I think, over the next 5 years. And I think education is not going to disappear, of course, and we need it. It's essential to our society and it's important. But I think what we deem to be an educational endeavor and how that happens, I think is going to transform significantly over the next decade.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree. Like when we are learning something, it's very different now. Like the access for us to learn specific things versus before. And that will change the game. That would change the game of not just in education industry, but as well as the speed, the rules of the job, the demand in the market, or any businesses, right? So that's pretty much. I can remember those days that we have Napsters and we need to download and burn some CDs, the
Yeah.
songs that we want, right? So, but now things have changed, and that's pretty awesome for you to share those ideas, those insights. It also reminds me of the other side of of how I look at things as well. So if we're gonna go with AI making complex creativity accessible, how can entrepreneurs without tech backgrounds like start leveraging AI in their work?
Well, I think the need for a technology background is not even there, actually. So the not having any technology background or any knowledge of technology, full stop, is not it's not even necessary. Until a few months ago, all you needed to really know is how to speak English competently. Now, even that is not a prerequisite because all of these models and these tools are multilingual, so you can really use whatever language you're able to speak within reason. I think even within reason, it's still into the tens of languages, if not hundreds, right? So right now, the only barrier to entry is a little bit of upskilling or navigation and how to use a particular piece of software. But really, that's just navigation because how you use it is by typing or speaking your prompt or your idea. And then the only barrier to entry is your own imagination, and I think that's the exciting part for someone like me is that it's not at all about your your background in understanding technology in any way. So for entrepreneurs to kind of leverage this regardless of their technological experience, the way to get started is really to kind of think about what it is that you see as an obstacle to getting something done. Let's take, for example, yesterday I was speaking at an event and I did this on stage. I basically said, hey, look, just for fun, I made this trailer over lunchtime a couple of days ago. I was watching Shogun the night before and I got inspired and I was like, oh, cool, I want to make like a, like Japanese themed drama series trailer, and never made a trailer in my life before. And so I cracked open a few tools, Mid-Journey for the kind of visual imagery of what the scenes and the individuals and the environments look like. I used Runway to animate some of those into like motion sequences. I used something called Hedra to do lip sync, and I used 11 Labs to create a voice. And I'm a musician, so I can't really use the music AIs, but I would have used Udio or Suno to create a music bed, but I actually just did it myself because I found it fun. And within, a slightly extended lunch break of like 90 odd minutes, I had a trailer. I had like a, whatever it is, 30-second trailer, and I'll share it with you so you can show your audience. And yesterday on stage, I showed that and I said, look, I did this yesterday at lunchtime. And I had 1 hour, 1.5 hours then. I only have half an hour now. But let's pick somebody out of the crowd and let's have a conversation about your business idea or your side hustle or your project at work. And let's think about how you could envisage that thing that you've barely started in the highest fidelity as if there was already an ad on YouTube for your product or for your idea. And, within half an hour, we took a concept that this lady had of her book that she would like to write. And we made, a 30-second YouTube ad that was super compelling. So the way to get started is really to kind of like say, what is the fastest track to realizing your actual concept? It doesn't mean you have to release it, or it doesn't mean that's the right answer, but to be able to get from maybe not A to Z, but A to Y very, very quickly really allows you to kind of crystallize the things that you want to achieve. And so those tools are out there. They're free tiers. If you want to spend a bit of money, there's subscription tiers that allow you to go a bit further. But yeah, the only boundary to entry is really exercising your imagination.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That's pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to get that. You mentioned like a video or a clip that you wanted to
Yeah.
share. That would be beautiful for us to see. So now let's go with your innovations. Like I'm really curious, and I also wanted to really showcase like what you have done, not just the quick demo that you did, but I'm sure that we can talk about more about the deepest things that you have done. And let's start with your sound drive project with Will I Am and Mercedes-Benz. It's groundbreaking. What's the core vision behind AI powered soundscapes for driving?
SoundDrive came about because Will has a really, really deep relationship with Mercedes, and he was working with them on brainstorming new innovations, and they have an electric vehicle. They had an electric vehicle coming out, and a lot of other companies, I think, were pursuing engine sounds, like emulated engine sounds. And I think that's something that they naturally came to him on, because of the fact that he's obviously a groundbreaking musician, and sound design is well within his wheelhouse as well. And I think he sort of saw a different opportunity to do something more unique in the car than simply have an emulated engine sound. And the idea came about where he sort of started thinking about, what about engaging in a different way with the music that we listen to in the vehicle? A lot of people listen to music in the cars, and that's something that is usually like almost a passive experience. But what about if it was deeply integrated into your actual drive? And so he spun up like a little hacked together prototype with some friends of ours, and went and demoed it to the leadership in Germany. And then once they greenlit it and said, actually, yeah, this is kind of cool. Let's, can you really make this? He gave me a call and he was like, hey man, like, do you think you can get this made? What I mean, do you think we can actually build this in a way that it really is not just a huge computer in the back of the car that's making all these sounds whilst, in this hacky way, but something that could live inside the vehicle and really be a part of these Mercedes vehicles, right? And Mercedes, obviously, one of the, if not the most prestigious car company in the world. So it's not going to be easy, and they have engineering chops for days, and they're going to want to know that we can really do this. And so, yeah, I had the privilege of working with Will to build out the team of folks that would, I guess, spend the next 6-7 months with myself and Will to build essentially what is it's not necessarily generative, it's more of like an adaptive or kind of reaction based music engine that lives inside of the head unit of the vehicles. So it's just another mode, like radio or Bluetooth or whatever. It's just another mode in the Mercedes vehicles called Sound Drive. And essentially what it does is it takes the music that you're listening to from our selection of songs, and it adapts those songs in real time. It kind of rearranges, remixes them in real time based on the style of your drive. And so, everything from acceleration to suspension to steering, all of these things that you would naturally do in the car, obviously, as you're driving. We take the signals of those things and we interpret those signals into musical expression for the song you're listening to. So you could be listening to, for example, I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas. And, when you're stuck at a red light, the song is a little bit more sort of mellow, a bit more subdued. You hear kind of sprinklings of like the chords that you'd recognize and a kind of almost like a submerged feeling. So it's a little bit more ducked under and relaxed. And as you start accelerating 10, 20, 30 miles an hour, reaching sort of 40, 50 on a 60 mile per hour road, the song sort of starts to unpack itself and open up. And you hear, as you rev the engine, you hear the bass line. And as the wheels start spinning, you hear the drums kind of unraveling. And then you hear, as you reach the kind of the peak speed, you sort of hear the big chorus of I Got a Feeling. And that's really the intent, is that you kind of continuously evolve the song through your drive. There's no beginning and there's no end. It just continues to transform itself throughout the style of your drive. So this was really something that, we thought we were super excited about. And then in 2024, CES, January, the Consumer Electronics Show, which happens in Las Vegas, we had the opportunity to demo this. And I think we smashed all of the records when it came to the amount of test drives, voluntary test drives that people wanted to do. We swept up the innovation awards. We won, if I'm not mistaken, we won 6 innovation awards across all of the publications and stuff covering CES. And yeah, a year later, I think November actually, we started releasing SoundDrive into real vehicles, real Mercedes vehicles, starting with a bunch of the electric vehicles, and then hopefully over the coming months, they'll start rolling out into some of the other models.
Wow, it is amazing. I'm excited for us to see.
Yeah, if you manage to jump into a Mercedes vehicle, especially an electric one, then check if they've got SoundDrive. Yeah, the rollout is happening in chunks, and yeah, most of those cars that are qualifying will be updated over the air. So really excited to see it out in the wild.
Wow. Would that be available worldwide, or is it in a specific city or
Yeah,
country?
it has already started to be distributed generally worldwide. I think that it's US and Europe primarily in these chunks. It's like the whole rollout process is something that Mercedes do, very rigid, like in a very rigid and structured way. So it will kind of go out to the territories that they have targeted. I think US and Europe are obvious ones, and then of course eventually China and the wider region in Asia. So yeah, it will be rolled out worldwide to qualifying vehicles.
Wow. I can't wait. Can't wait to see that. I can't wait to feel the experience.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Definitely go knocking on your local Mercedes dealership to get a test drive.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So that's a great inspiring story, and just by you sharing that is giving me a lot of curiosity, and I'm sure with our audience here will also get that curiosity as well. So let's say you're also I know that you're also involved in an upcoming like AI chip manufacturer. What does that solve, and how does it impact AI driven creativity?
So Will has this company, FYI, with which we built SoundDrive, obviously, and Will's been working on a product. The app is it's already out. It's called FYI, but we'd also been working on this other thing called FYI Radio, which was based around the AI personas that live inside FYI. And it's this kind of reimagination of like the radio experience where the host is always available to converse with, and you can interrupt the host at any time. You listen to music, it's information, weather, whatever, but you can at any given time speak to the host, who is an AI persona. And those personas are extremely, natural sounding. And Will has done an amazing job, like honestly, a genius job in terms of how he's managed to adapt some of the technologies that we've been using to really ring out, colloquial sounding voices, accents, personality. And that's kind of been the secret sauce. And A couple of weeks ago at South by Southwest, Will was there at South by Southwest, and in collaboration with Qualcomm, we announced that we would be taking advantage and collaborating with Qualcomm to leverage their on-device AI capabilities. And what this really means is that, I think as these things become more and more common and commonly used by consumers, there's naturally a demand for there to be an AI persona or presence or agent or, however you want to phrase it, in pretty much all of the devices we use, right? Already, there's a multitude of AIs that I can tap into here on my phone, from Siri to OpenAI to ChatGPT, etc. And same on my laptop. And now in the cars that are rolling out, as we talked about Mercedes, they have their own voice assistant. We also have FYI radio in the Mercedes cars. Very soon, you can imagine a world where we've got fridges and washing machines and all kinds of things where that same interaction, voice-based interaction might exist. And the truth is, there's no real easy way for manufacturers to leverage those capabilities without partnering with somebody or starting to rethink how they even build these products centered around a voice agent or a persona. So the cool thing about this potential partnership or this partnership that we announced is that, hopefully it's possible for us to actually offer that layer of AI personas to OEMs and manufacturers who are building products for the next year or 2 years time or whatever, and want to, at the essentially at the equivalent of like a flick of a switch, activate personas directly on the device that already exist, that are already really well baked and really human sounding, and yeah, make those available to millions of customers who might buy their products. So that's really the advantage is having these capable AI personas and models baked onto the actual silica, that we have in our devices, and starting to cut away from the requirement of having, all of the data fly into the cloud and the rest of it, and also removing the need to spend millions and millions of dollars and months and years to develop your own version of that for your device. Where yeah, we can have, we can activate that for people who are building these devices.
I understand, and my experience in terms of, as you mentioned about the level of colloquial and accents, and that's awesome. I know that in the general tools right now, that's the huge challenge. There
Yeah,
has to be a lot of fine tuning and all of that. That's awesome. That's awesome.
yeah, it's a lot of fun as well. Yeah, so that's definitely one of the best parts of it, is that we get to have a lot of fun with bringing these characters to life. So
And that's just two of them, right? And I know that you have a lot of projects, and let's just talk about other projects as well that I know. But let's talk about like the big brands that you have been working with, like Apple, Microsoft for Copilot, Mindvalley. I know that you're
yeah,
collaborating with them. And how do you see AI shaping the future of consumer experience?
yeah, with Mindvalley, I spent the last couple of years really helping Mindvalley and Vision, I think, kind of amplify what they've already built and successful company they've already built within the personal growth space, education space, and trying to find a way really to turn that approach to education or ongoing education and personal growth into a household name and into the kind of consumer lexicon. And I always thought what they were doing is pretty compelling, and there's many other people doing stuff. There's things like Masterclass and BBC Maestro and things like that. But the Mind Valley thing is really interesting because they're so holistic in the way that they look at personal growth. It's everything from professional to health, and wellness, to family and finances and all of the things, frankly, that all of us have to deal with on an everyday basis. So how do you leverage technology to help you tap into those things and stay on track for all of those things? where everything else is so siloed. And so, like, if you're using the health kit app or health app on your phone, then it's all about your physical well-being, right? And of course there is actually also mental well-being stuff there. There's like meditations and things like that, but the stuff that might impact that, such as stressing about money or your job or your career or your relationship or whatever, those things are not, they're not represented within that experience. And I think that kind of holistic approach to your growth and well-being and so on is something that, again, technology and AI in particular in the near term seems to be a good glue, if you like, to bring those things into one place. And context is super important. And it seems like these things give us data and they give us insights, but maybe they lack wider context in terms of the human life, right? And I think AI is potentially allowing us to conjoin some of those elements from different areas and then offer almost like another persona to interact with that can help us unpack some of that stuff and match our goals with our actions, with our environments, and so on. And that's kind of what we set about doing about a year ago, and had an amazing opportunity thanks to the brilliant developer relations team at Apple in Singapore, actually, who who gave us the opportunity to work on the Vision Pro when it first came out. And our first kind of swing at this was, what could we put inside of Vision Pro that is very much the essence of Mindvalley. And so we had these three features deployed on day one inside of a Mindvalley Vision Pro app, which were immersive meditations. So, in like a serene environment, like the sea in Jordan, or like these kind of Colombian forest, and a couple of other things that we had. And we had public speaking practice as a completely separate thing, so slightly more professional centric, but again, as a personal growth tool, like having the opportunity to practice in front of a small group or a big auditorium within the Vision Pro experience and have all your notes there and be able to kind of like, get comfortable with presenting something. That was another feature. And then we had, Mindvalley quests, which are essentially episodic series to help you pursue a particular area of personal growth in this kind of immersive environment where you could watch with other people and so on. So this was launched, and we were super grateful for that. And then the rest of the year, man, was honestly a whirlwind, because after that we managed to collaborate with Apple again, where we had this vision for the next gen of Mindvalley, which was about taking your goals and helping to create curated journeys or pathways for you as an individual to achieve those goals that touched all of those different areas. And we demonstrated this as part of the iPhone 16 launch at the end of last year, where our Mindvalley app is now, if you walk into any Apple store in the world today, you can see the Mindvalley app pre-installed on the iPads that are being demoed there. And again, an amazing way to sort of represent the combination of like human-centric education and well-being and personal growth platform and AI in a way that it's really there to guide and help navigate your goals. So for me, this is the future of the consumer space when it comes to technology and AI. It's about combining the things we already do on a daily basis and really like upgrading them using the technology and accelerating some of the things that we want to achieve through the technology. And that's becoming, I think, more and more prevalent throughout all of the companies and apps that are building stuff with AI.
All right. So Mannon, let's go jump into more about AI in like everyday life, business and creativity. Like how do you use AI daily? I'm curious. Like whether it's in music, whether it's
Mm.
workflow, product innovation, like what's your personal AI tech stack?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think it's constantly evolving because there are so many new tools like emerging every day, and like different aspects of workflow being affected from day to day. I think for the past close to 2 years now, I've been using LLMs, obviously, ChatGPT in particular. Yeah, so everything from kind of quick turnaround of like doing annoying admin tasks, like filling out forms or writing letters of complaint or whatever it is that I'm doing. So a lot of those admin tasks I try to fend off to an LLM, and then I tweak it or whatever. Sometimes ideation, like, as well. So in fact, a lot of time ideation. So I'm an ideas guy. I'll have an idea a minute, and then I try and like bounce that idea off of ChatGPT to see if it can help me think, go down a different avenue or think about something that I haven't thought about yet. And so I often use it for that. I also use Midjourney quite a lot as well. I've also been using it again for a year and a half to 2 years. The differences between what it used to be and what it is now is really, honestly, striking. But it's great for someone like me who's constantly working on visualizing my ideas or creating pitches or decks, and more recently even bringing very visual, audio visual ideas to life, because I then take Midjourney and combine it with something like Runway, where I'm starting to almost create little trailers and ads and so on to even further illustrate concepts, whether those concepts are products or campaigns or whatever it might be. So I use a lot of that. And then when it comes to music, it's an interesting one. It's slightly philosophical for me, because I do have a lot of respect, and obviously I myself, create music in a very different way. But what I'm finding really useful are some of the tools that people like Apple are bringing to the music making workflow. So within Logic, for example, which is an Apple produced music platform or app, and these guys have, I think have really done a great job of taking things which might take a little bit longer in your typical workflow, and leveraging AI to kind of fast track it, and again, things like offering alternative chord progressions or creating a drum track for you as a placeholder whilst you work on the rest of the song, and things like that. So they're very cool. They're very cool kind of applications of AI emerging within the music workflow. But then again, of course, with platforms like Udio and Suno, you're able to quickly generate, for example, the backing track for this podcast in the style that you want, and so on. Or with Udio in particular, it's been really awesome to like start with an idea that I have and hum it in to Udio, and then have Udio like turn that into the instrument I had in mind, like a saxophone or whatever, or build around that melody so that I can have a bit more of an idea of what the song or the production might sound like whilst I work on the song part. So there's so many awesome ways of leveraging this stuff, and I know you probably have also played around with some stuff in the kind of film and podcasting world, where I've seen people doing automated edits of their podcasts and overdubs for multilingual listeners or users or whatever. So I think there's just a plethora of tools emerging.
Beautiful. Very well said. I'm very excited about really knowing about, like, when we talk about, I know that you have a full respect of branding, copyrights, music, and I'm just curious about your thoughts about AI generated music, and some branding is on the rise. So will AI ever replace human creativity, or will it always be a tool for augmentation?
I think it's a very good question. The truth is, the way that AIs work today, the way machine learning has always worked, is that it learns from example, right? So it is trained on a bunch of material. It sees a bunch of examples. It then infers, characteristics of all those examples, and then arguably, and this is an ongoing debate with many people, arguably creates something original. And I do think that actually there is an element of creativity or creative output that comes from the algorithm. It's hard to quantify or qualify in some ways because it's impossible to really know, like, which fragment did it choose from which part of its learning journey to come up with this particular piece or this particular concept. But the same kind of goes for us. We're also, these things are kind of in our likeness in some ways, where we also learn from experience, and every idea, thought, concept you come up with can only happen in your mind because of the concoction of all of the experiences and things that you've learned and so on. So I'm a little bit more of a kind of sitting on the fence as to whether it's actually creating something or it's just mimicking something. I think there's the truth is somewhere in the middle, but I don't think you'll ever replace creativity. I think that's a strong word. I think it's like, whatever we are creating with AI, although it feels, and in many cases it is, far supreme to any one individual's ability to, let's say, recite information at this kind of speed. Very, very few people on the planet who could do that, if any. But it still doesn't have this kind of intangible thing that humans have and probably will always have above AI, which is some people like to call it the soul or morality, or this, like, there's something else that we have which is kind of undefined and hard to explain, and without getting too spiritual about it, whatever, that 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 means that we combine things and collide ideas and crystallize concepts, in ways that are just unfathomable and intangible and difficult to understand. And I think that's ultimately true creativity with an injection of personal experience. You know what I mean? And I think that's the thing that I think is going to be very, very hard to replace. Emulate, maybe, but at that point, I think we have to again be optimists about our own ability and our own uniqueness. So yeah.
I fully understand, and I fully know how you feel because I'm also a vision idea person, and I can sense that there's a difference between having your own unique creativity versus solely just depending on a tool. What about, like, many entrepreneurs right now are overwhelmed by AI, and what's your advice for those who are looking to integrate AI into their business without overcomplicating it?
I think start with the tasks that you're going to do anyway. Don't
Mhm.
try and start doing things that are completely new with AI, right? Like, try and do the things that you already do. See if you can optimize the workflow of those things, or optimize the people who are working on those things by helping them leverage AI. In Mindvalley, I can give you as an example, which is really adopted AI at its core. Everything from drafting newsletters to ideating around new content or quests, to handling reporting, of topics being discussed with internal teams or so on. All of this stuff has just removed so much of an admin burden on on the teams, and on people who are actually very talented and can be doing other things, can be thinking about the future of Mindvalley, or thinking about the prospect of new types of content, new revenue streams, new ways of engaging with customers, new ways of helping people. So I think I would start there. What are overheads and things that consume a lot of time or consume a lot of resource? How can this strip away some of that fat? And then on the other end of the spectrum, what are some of those questions you're asking yourself about the future? And most of us don't have time or energy or resources to aggressively pursue those things that are not business critical. And the truth is, now maybe you have a companion in some ways that can start to push those things a little bit further and faster, and get you, more of like a comprehensive understanding of where that road might lead if you pursue that particular thing over another thing. So I think the ideation and innovation end of your business can also benefit significantly by the adoption of AI.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's jump into AI's role in empowering and social impact, right? You've worked with AI projects for refugees and underserved communities. Can you share an example like where AI is making a real world difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think the work that I did, was more to, I think, bring a sense of identity to. You had the privilege of working with the Refugee Olympic Team. I'm actually wearing my Paris Olympics hat right now because, yeah, for the Paris Olympics, we had the opportunity, myself and Frame Store, the company I work with very closely, Gravity Road as well. We had the opportunity to essentially help the refugee team, which has been around for I think 4 or 5 Olympics now, have a sense of identity where otherwise they didn't. They never really had a badge or a like a sense of camaraderie because they would always meet at the day of the Olympics. There was never an anthem. There was never a campaign, and so the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, trusted us to deliver that last year, and it was amazing because again, the idea of like taking what we did in the end was there's a lady named NG who was a brilliant illustrator of children's books, herself from a refugee background, and what we did was we took illustrations of the athletes and filmed the athletes, and then we trained an AI to basically like to animate her her illustrative versions superimposed on the actual actions of the athletes and create this narrative around this AI animated world where the refugees were just all another number, what I mean, and all they wanted to do was just break out of that and compete just like any other nation, just like any other athlete. And that campaign, debuted at Cannes Lions and was played at the opening ceremony. And last year, sorry, at the Olympics, the first ever refugee Olympian won a medal, which was Cindy Ngamba for boxing. She won bronze. So it was really like a iconic moment, I think, for all of us in our careers, but also I think for the global refugee community who obviously have all kinds of hardships, unimaginable hardships, and just to have a sense of pride. But going back to your question, I think that also I know there are a lot of organizations deploying these technologies to also aid refugees, and not just refugees, but people in need in all kinds of ways, from disease and medical kind of use cases, where I think AI is trying to accelerate kind of root causes of different diseases, all the way through to trying to understand how to distribute vaccines. From on the refugee side, I think there's again analysis of how to kind of support masses of refugees migrating from one region to another region, and how to predict the flow of people to reach safety and intervene in different ways. People are really starting to leverage this technology for good, and I think it's important that we always have an eye on that, because often the dialogue is always about how it's going to tear the world apart even further. And again, like with the good always comes the bad, but I think we have to have faith that in general people want to people want to do the right thing, and this stuff is a superpower really to help push in that direction.
Definitely a superpower. So, if AI can be a game changer for global inclusion, what needs to happen to ensure AI is accessible and beneficial for all?
Well, I think accessibility is an interesting one, because I think until very recently, although AI as an application level was or is accessible, I think many devices, phones, etc., and many of those platforms I mentioned earlier have free tiers and all the rest of it, it still felt expensive. And we, of course, we've all read reports about how expensive it is to train these models, to run these models, the potential impact on the climate with electricity usage and so on. And then, I think a couple of months ago, came along DeepSeek, which I think debunked also a lot of that theory and showcased that actually on much lower costs, you can achieve a very comparable result, maybe better, some would argue. And now we're talking, as we said earlier, about AI is even living on device and not necessarily even needing to tap into the cloud and for most everyday purposes. And I think just the speed of innovation is means that we're just going to get to that so much faster as well. So I think accessibility is not going to be a huge issue. I think accessibility is going to be a prerequisite in many ways. I think this is the new data, or which was the new internet, which was the new electricity, or telephony and electricity, which was water, right? Like it's like this is going to be a part of our everyday lives, I'm pretty sure. And I think it's more a matter of what does that mean, and how do we ensure that it levels the playing field more than anything else. And I think the great news about this versus some of those other technologies that have been introduced, whatever, is there will be far less gatekeeping, I feel, because again, DeepSeek was one of many things that has happened, but just proves that you don't need like all of the latest and greatest GPUs and all of the tens of millions of dollars and whatever. It was still millions of dollars, but it was a fraction compared to what some of the other organizations and companies involved in this landscape was saying that it would take. And that means that, hey, look, maybe in Africa or parts of Asia or South America, people might not have hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal, but there's a few people who have millions of dollars at their disposal. And then maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, there's definitely even more people who have hundreds of thousands of dollars at their disposal. So as it starts to become more affordable, I think these regions will also be building and be erecting their own platforms, and you'll see huge adoption of that in those regions for various different folks. The fact that AI can be so personalized and so colloquially relevant means that people will want that. So it's not that everybody just wants the biggest brand. I think people will want the most relevant version of these things, which for them. So I think we're going to see actually, I'm very optimistic about the adoption and the possibility of people having access to this. It's just, I would urge people to just not wait and just be the ones to actually build it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think localized relatability, these are things that are also missing pieces in terms of really adopting something. And that's pretty true. I fully agree with what you were just sharing. So okay, we are about to have onto the end, and if you had to predict like one major shift, you did some prediction just now, and what's one major shift in AI that impact specifically on education, creativity, or entrepreneurship? So what would it be for you?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about, inevitably there'll be the one person billion-dollar company, right? I think Sam Altman said that, or somebody said that. So I think that's going to be possible. I do think that that's one of the big things that we might see. But I think that for me, I would say the biggest prediction, or the thing that I'm most excited about actually, is the possibility of all three of those things that you said: education, creativity, and entrepreneurship, for that being possible for people who simply don't have otherwise access or prospects to achieve or even attempt any of those things. I think there are people who have minimal education or no education, or can't afford to pursue education. People who are inherently creative, like me, who, if it wasn't for technology, I would have to pursue, kind of my run of the mill version of my job, which is also fine. But the fact is that I just think, somewhere locked away in most people is some creativity for something that they maybe haven't been able to exercise, and that's going to become possible. And then the last piece of that, entrepreneurship, is really is sort of the amplifying of those two things, right? It's like, if you can learn how to do something and then you can make something, then what can you make of it? And I think that's the entrepreneurial part, where you no longer have to just make this stuff and kind of sit on it and wish you had the money to explode it, but actually you can explode it. You can make it accessible to others. And where we have apps today, we're going to have agents tomorrow. So if you're able to create your own agent to execute on tasks, and it just so happens that your agent, no matter what your background or where you're from, is the most efficient at doing something because of the way that you've thought about the application of that agent, then best idea wins. And I think that's really the most exciting prediction I can make.
Awesome. Awesome. And so, Manon, thank you for having this podcast with me, and I'm sure our audience will be so much happy. However, let's just say they wanted to look for you. Where's the best?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first of all. But yeah, I'm on all of the socials. It's very easy. It's just at Mannon Dave. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on X. Yeah, so you can hit me up and let me know what you guys think about all of this stuff. And let me know what you thought of the podcast, of course. And yeah, let's build an awesome future together.
All right. Thank you, Manon. And thank you for watching Formax AI Podcast. And I'll see you on the next episode.